Hello again, and welcome to the Top 10 Resume Tips for IT Pros webinar presented by Train Signal's resume experts Heather and Alan Ackmann. I'm Lisa Spooner from Train Signal, and I'd like to take a minute to tell you what to expect in the next hour. The presentation will take approximately 50 minutes, after which we'll have 10 additional minutes for question and answers. Please feel free to submit your questions in the questions box throughout the presentation. You don't have to wait till the end. Also, go ahead and use that questions box if you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, and we will do our best to assist you. Today's presentation will be recorded and will be available to view shortly after the presentation concludes at trainsignal.com/blogs/webinars. But don't worry, you don't need to scramble to write that down. We will email you the information about how to view the recording. After the presentation, when you close the webinar window, you will be prompted to take a short survey. Train Signal wants to hear from you, so please take a few minutes to complete this survey. If you have additional comments or feedback, you can send a note to webinars@trainsignal.com. Now, we'll also choose 3 participants from today's audience to each receive a free copy of Train Signal's Microsoft Word 2010 training. But in order to be eligible to win the free training, you need to fill out that quick survey that follows the presentation. With that, thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to start off with 2 polls to get the presentation started. So here's Heather and Alan.
Hi guys, this is Heather.
And this is Alan.
And as Lisa mentioned, we will begin with a brief poll just to get a little bit more acquainted with who's all in the audience. So here is the first poll. I believe you can see that now. Go ahead and fill out those answers. Take a few minutes. And it looks like about 80% of you have voted. A couple more seconds. And closing the poll now. And as you can see in a few seconds, I believe, there we have it. We've got 9% of you are recent or soon-to-be college graduates. Welcome. Ooh, 7% of you are career changers. Very low percentage. I was a career changer myself. I feel ya. And 13% of you recently laid off. I'm so sorry. And 60% of you are currently employed but looking for something a little bit better. Good for you. And 11% of you are other. Interesting.
I wonder what the other means.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's other.
I'm sure it'll help the link.
All right. So we have one more poll real quick. And it is, when is the last time you have updated your resume? Go ahead, take about a minute or so to answer that one.
All right, looks like we've got up to the approaching 90% of the people having voted. So we're going to close that poll out and show you the results. And as you can see, we have over half of the people that have updated the resume in the last 12 months.
Good for you.
That's a very good thing. You should be keeping updated with your resume. We have 22% 1 to 3 years ago and 13% more than 5 years ago. Oh, that's perfectly all right as well. One thing we're going to be talking about is how to prioritize new information and make those decisions about when you include it. So thanks for taking those polls, guys. That's useful information for us to know how to talk to you as we go through this. All right, we're going to get started now with the first tip that we're using. The first tip that we have is about taking time to plan your overall organizational structure. When you write a resume, the first step you have to take is making a sort of global decisions about how the resume is going to look. And there's a lot of variables that you have to keep in mind when making those decisions. The first variable we need to talk about is regional. One thing about resumes is that depending on where you are and where you're going to be applying for a job, there can be a lot of local advice that you have to keep in mind. These resumes that we're going to be talking about today are geared towards someone who is looking for work in the U.S. That means there are certain sections that you might have heard about in a resume, things like a disclaimer that all of the information is accurate and that you stand behind it, for example, that you're not going to be seeing in some of the resumes we look at.
Yeah, that's usually specific to other countries. In the U.S., other things like whether or not you're married or single, that information is usually left out of the resume. But it is common in other countries abroad.
Now, in addition to the regional resume advice, you also have to think about the type of resume that you're making. There are basically three different types or formats for resumes. The first one is a paper resume, where it's printed in Microsoft Word, formatted as such, something that can either be viewed in PDF form or printed out directly. The second is a web resume, where it's going to be uploaded maybe to a central database, something that's a little bit more searchable, and sometimes these have some specific formats associated with them. Finally, there's electronic or scannable resumes, where instead of being strictly in a web format, it's something that's designed to be searched. In the past, these would sometimes be used when people would often fax in resumes, and you needed to be able to anticipate those kinds of formatting conventions. Primarily in this webinar, again to set some limitations, we're going to be talking about paper resumes. Now, the next thing you have to think about when making a decision about resumes is what type of format you're going to be using. Again, there are three basic kinds of resumes. The first is a chronological resume. And a chronological resume uses the background and direct work history of the applicant in order to have an organizational principle. Typically starts off, the body of the resume will begin with the most recent job worked, and then it goes in reverse chronological order. Now, there's also a functional resume. And a functional resume, rather than being organized around jobs, is going to be organized around skills. So sometimes these are soft skills, like your people abilities or management backgrounds, and sometimes they're divided up into hard skills, like the skill sets that you've got for your technical backgrounds or certifications. Most people are going to work with chronological resumes, but sometimes if you've done a lot of contract work, or if you're a career switcher where you've got a lot of background but not a lot of maybe some gaps in the work history, or a lot of 2 or 3 month
or
jobs.
Even fresh out of college.
Yeah, or
too.
fresh out of college without a lot of direct background, or a lot of direct work experience, but a lot of academic and coursework. Then sometimes a functional resume will work.
The preferred format, though, I think there is definite preference for the chronological.
Oh, there
just
absolutely
to focus on the work history.
When most people look at a functional resume, the first question that's sometimes in the back of the mind is, why is this person using a functional resume instead of a chronological one? So when making those initial organizational decisions, unless you have a good reason for functional, go with chronological. Now, sometimes you might be in a situation where you need to use a hybrid resume as well. A hybrid resume contains variations of each, and that can happen if you've got a job you've worked quite a bit in the recently, but you've got a lot of background material like contract work that you want to make a little bit more prominent. But again, that's a really rare situation. Usually it's going to be one or the other and chronological. Now that brings us, outside of those formatting conventions, to the most important point we're going to make about resumes here, and that is the fact that content is king. You hear a lot of information about the design of a resume and the format of a resume, and all those things are important to consider, but they're subservient, I think, and we think, to the actual material that you're going to be putting in there.
And towards the end of this webinar, we're going to get into some really nitpicky tips, but all of those are, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, subservient?
Yeah, all
to
those
this
are
one
secondary
principle.
concerns.
Secondary concerns, that's a better way to put it.
But when you make those content-centered decisions, just like you make decisions about the format of the resume, how you're going to deliver it, how you're going to organize it, you have to think about the primary objective that you want a resume to accomplish. There's an illusion out there with resumes, especially in this area, that a resume is like a big biography. It's this huge book that describes every single thing that you've ever done in the past. It gets your entire background, and I don't really think that that's necessary. Sometimes, frankly, when the average time spent looking at a resume the first time around is less than 10 seconds, the goal shouldn't be to overwhelm a reader with everything that you've ever done. And to put that another way,
this is the Ackmann resume equation.
I'll call this Ackmann resume equation. There's an illusion that volume equals respectability.
That's not the case.
The more you show that you've done, the better you can present yourself.
So volume does not equal respectability.
Yeah, it's not. I think that a better way to think about this is that when you make a resume, you're making a targeted and strategic approach to a particular job objective, not just giving a list of everything that you've ever accomplished. And that's especially something to keep in mind since most of you already have a resume and a job and are looking for something better, you don't have to list everything you've ever done. We'll talk about that in more detail as we go. Now, I talked a little bit about the organization of resumes. Just very quick, I want to take you through some of the main things that are main categories that often appear within a resume. Over here, you've got certifications. When you work in a resume, you're going to, or especially in the IT field, certifications are important. The degrees that you've picked up and the specific things that Microsoft has signed off on you for. So that's going to be a position. You're going to be starting off with the job title that you want. Sometimes there's a profile statement as well.
Also known as the objective statement.
Yeah, also known as a job objective statement. And that's a section of a resume that just goes through and gives the highlights of who you are and who you hope to be in relation to the job you're applying for.
You should really think of that profile statement as kind of the introductory paragraph to what follows in the resume.
Correct. And then you've also got a list of, often in an IT resume, list of technologies, systems, software, etc. There's a lot of ways you can go about organizing that. In this case, it's broken up into categories of different kinds of technologies.
Security technologies, systems, networking, software. You could throw in virtualization, whatever.
Sure. There's also key skills. Now, this is something that's added, as you can see, for search engines. When you have a resume that's been uploaded into a database, people look through those databases just the way you would farm for any other kinds of information. They type in key terms. And sometimes one of the things that affects searchability is how prominently certain terms are listed. And sometimes, depending on how you're submitting the resume, if it is a web format, you might actually be asked to input these, it's just so your resume has tags associated with it.
Now, one thing I want to add to this, if you do choose to add a section for key skills, which basically works as a keyword, paragraph, or whatnot, make sure they're skills you actually have. A resume is a reflection of what you can offer to the position you're applying for. And I know with the web, a lot of people throw in some keyword terms or in the blog that have nothing to do with the content of that blog. That's just not honest. And that is a good way to get you, fired.
Yeah, and to be disregarded immediately when going through the resume. You've also got an education section and then a work history section, as well as relevant projects that we've worked on. Now, I think this seems like a pretty successful resume in a one-page format, but the point to make here is that this is not the only way to do it. This is a quick overview of the kinds of sections you're going to be including and how you present those, what order you use, what gets prominent, what gets subdued, is going to be a function of your own background and your own objectives. There is no one right way to do this. So the next thing that we want to point out, we don't have a lot of time to go over all of the things on this resume,
sections.
And all the individual sections. But I do want to point out we have Train Signal training, and there's a lot of blogs written there about all of these individual sections. So if you want some feedback or input about those, something in your education section, for example, that would be a good place to go to get that information.
Yeah, go to the blog. You can search for Alan Ackmann or even the IT Career Help, and you'll find a ton of articles on our website about more specifics about these sections of the resume that you can create.
Before we move on to that, though, I want to share a piece of advice just about writing that a professor told me a really long time ago when I first started in graduate school. I got there the first day, and the professor, who was this nice, genteel Southern woman, stood up and said, "Y'all, this is the first and only thing you need to know about writing." And on the chalkboard, she wrote, "Serve the whole." Now, the point she was making there is that when you hear all these talks about making your own individual decisions, they should all be put into the framework of making sure that those smaller decisions advance the main thing you want to accomplish. In this case, the specific goal and job you want to get. All of the other decisions, what you organize, what you put in bullet points, are meant to be decided by whether they advance or limit that larger goal. Now, it's good advice, and it's taken me through a lot of writing challenges. But here's the thing. She had sort of curling and elegant penmanship, and when she wrote "serve the whole," this is what I pictured.
Serve the whale. He thought the O looked like an A in cursive writing.
And said "serve the whale." So it's my first day of graduate school, my first class, and I'm looking at it thinking, serve the whale? Am I serving the whale to other people? Am I serving the whale something? This graduate school is hard. Now, the takeaway from that is that even though the image is a little ridiculous, but hopefully memorable, the advice is solid. When you go through a resume, you have to serve the whole, and the whole you are serving is the content that you present.
Specific to the job you are applying for.
Now, the good news is, though, there are ways within Microsoft Word that you can get a head start on how to organize your content. Heather's going to talk about those a little bit.
But before we do that, I want to point out a question from James Gibbons over here. He states, "I have not worked since 2005. I have never done IT work professionally, but I have a great IT skills and have just received the A+, Network+, Security+ certifications. But I need to get a job soon, and I have no real prior work history. What can I do?" Well, that goes back to those kinds of resumes we were talking about earlier. There's the chronological, which focuses on your experience, your work history, and then there's the functional resume. Here, when you're creating your resume, you want to highlight your core studies, like how you prepped for like these various certifications. Probably the very first thing you'd list on that resume would be these certifications and any transferable skills that would help you in the IT role that you're applying for. So here we're talking about those skill resumes where you are again highlighting those skills in a functional format. And we'll again talk about that a little bit later too. Okay. So once again, the content is king point. We talked about this a little earlier. Now, when it comes to your resume, content is always the most important thing to work on, hands down. But it's not the only thing to work on. How your resume looks at a glance is also important. And taking the time to really make it look good at a glance and making it readable, that is very, very time consuming, especially if you're not a Microsoft Word power user. Now, luckily, Microsoft Word does provide a wealth of free templates through the application that you can use to get you started. And they really have, like in the last year or so, added just a ton more. They've actually contracted with, I think, Monster.com. And Monster, there are resumes created by resume experts at Monster who have included these from the application, all the resumes that you can find. So there's really a lot that you can choose from as a starting place. So one more question here, and that is going to be, have you ever used Microsoft Word resume or CV template? And you know what? I do not see that here. Huh. All right.
We have a phantom poll that never appeared.
Poll that never appeared in GoToWebinar. So skipping that one.
We've got the question.
You
You know
get
whether
the
you know
idea.
it.
You
and whether
probably
you have.
have.
Here's a short answer. Most people have not. So here's the information.
If you haven't ever used a poll, in Microsoft Word, if you go to the File menu and click on New, and especially if you're using Office 2010, by the way, this is what you will see in Office 2010 when you click on New. You'll see a section above to create a blank new document, and then underneath that you'll see an Office.com template section. And towards the bottom of that list, there's an option for resumes and CVs. And clicking on that, you'll see 3 envelopes. There's one for basic resumes, which is kind of the container that they use, a folder for all of the simple style-centric resumes. That's where you'll find chronological resumes or functional resumes or keyword resumes. And by general situation, if you are a recent high school or college grad, that's where you'll find those specific kinds of resumes. Now, there's also job-specific resumes. If you're looking for one particular job, that's where you'll find it in this folder right here. And it contains both resume samples and templates by job titles and career path. These can vary in their specificity, ranging from more broad titles like teacher, writer, or banker, to some very specific situation. There's one even for a helicopter pilot, insurance claims processor, those kinds of resumes. You'll find those in the job-specific resumes folder. Now in the situation-specific resumes section, these are where you're going to find resume samples and templates by situation. So if you are recently out of the military and trying to get back into the professional world, or if you are high school or entry level, or even if you're looking for like a different kind of resume, something called the curriculum vitae, that's where you'll find those in that folder. Now, just to kind of take you through the tour of other kinds of things that you'll see in Microsoft Word regarding resume templates, once you choose a resume or select a resume in this view, you'll notice some other information off to the right in that right-hand pane. So in this one, the chronological resume, the traditional design, notice how it says provided by, and it says Microsoft Corporation. Typically the ones provided by Microsoft are true templates. They don't have any sample information for you to kind of work with. It's just you start typing your information right into them and start using them. Now, if you notice some of the icons above where it says Resume Basic, Resume, Origin Resume, there's a little icon in the lower right-hand corner. It looks like a little orange person. That is the Microsoft Community Submitted Templates icon. Now, Microsoft Community Submitted Templates have sort of been retired. If you want to submit a template as a member of the community like you used to, you can no longer. They have retired that feature, and there's no promise that they're going to keep those particular templates up. So if there is a resume that you use very, very often, and it is one of the community submitted templates, I would download that right now because they might disappear very soon, just to warn you. Now, if you work with a resume, there is one thing, this is bringing us to our second point, or second tip. A template is not set in stone. In fact, it's not really good idea to not change too much except putting your own personal information into that resume. You do want your resume to stand out and to show the unique you, and just plugging the information in doesn't really set you apart visually from the other resumes. In fact, if you can imagine someone's desk with a pile of resumes and they all look like this, really hard to find yours. Oh, there it is. So that's, again, the problem that templates can create. In fact, this resume, it's in the job-specific resumes folder in Microsoft Word, the sample resume for IT professional. I can't begin to tell you how often we actually see this resume handed in or turned in at Train Signal when people are applying for jobs here. It's a very, very popular one, and it rightly so. It is, well, very pretty to look at. It's really easy to find or see all the information and locate where that information is. So there's one example. Another one is the resume we showed you before earlier with, I mean, it gets a little unconventional, but that's the resume on MicrosoftOffice.com. And that, again, you can customize. You don't have to follow everything. For example, I'd probably minimize the name a bit.
It's a little
it's kind of, here's my name. But yeah, so like there are things that you can change. Another thing that you could possibly change about this one is that left sidebar, the certifications, the keywords, the education. Again, a little unconventional. You can just take that out and leave the white space or move the titles over a bit to kind of customize it to make it your own. Here's another one I just want to show you real quick, another IT-specific Microsoft Word template available through Microsoft Word, and that is the IT resume for an entry-level person. And this is what it looks like, and it's just a very, very simple structure. Very easy to customize and tailor to your own personal use. You guys ever see American Idol? I don't know. Alan and I are huge fans of American Idol, so one of the common things that we keep hearing the judge talk about is, oh, that was a great performance and you sounded great, but you didn't make the song your own. You just copied what the previous performer or the artist did with the song. And same thing with resumes, you got to make it your own. So don't feel that that template has to stay looking exactly as it did before.
Yeah, the primary advantage of a template is to give you a hint to the organization and to give you a hint of the design of the resume. It can be useful for those things, but other than that, the more personal, the better. And if you're really interested in getting personal with it, you can build one up from scratch.
Exactly, and then in that case, there are two very easy ways to format a resume from scratch or to customize a template that you're starting from, and that's through the use of Microsoft Word tables and the use of columns. Now, the first one I want to show you is a sample table resume that I just sort of whipped up really, really quickly right before this webinar. And this one, as you can see here, we have just sort of a blank shell, and if clicking inside there you can kind of see the contextual tabs, table tools, design, layout. You can see that it is in fact a table. And all of those lines in between, if you don't like how those lines look because it is a table, it's really easy to get rid of them. All you have to do is select the table and go to that Table Tools Design tab and choose No Border. And all of the lines disappear and you have a very pretty looking structure. Really easy to work with. You don't have to worry about adjusting a paragraph alignment through the ruler, or you don't have to worry about tab stops even. It's really easy to format things using a table. You can merge together cells. You can split cells apart if you want to add like another area or section of white space. So tables are a really good thing to keep in mind if you do decide you want to create a resume from scratch.
And working with those tables, of course, requires a certain facility with Microsoft Word. It takes a little bit of time getting used to if you haven't played around with it before.
Yeah, tables are really quirky. Like there's a lot of keyboard shortcuts and autocorrect options that just won't function when you're working with text inside of a table. So again, if you are a little bit more familiar with Word, it's a little bit easier to work with them, but if you're not, then it might take some time to get used to. Let's go to one of these questions real quick. There's a really good question here. We've got, on a resume, how would you address a long gap in employment, say a 2-year gap of nothing after graduating college to the present? Would that be necessary to elaborate on? Absolutely not. Basically, the point of a resume is to draw attention to the positive aspects of your career. You want to acknowledge and celebrate even those accomplishments. So drawing attention to the fact that you had a period of 2 years where you weren't employed, there's no reason to draw attention to that at all.
There's also no reason to hide them necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, the gap will show in the dates. I mean, you don't want to like be dishonest about it.
Right.
It'll come up probably during your interview, so if you are called in for an interview, I'd be prepared to answer that with, you know, something respectable and not.
Yeah, there can be completely legitimate reasons. Everything
Oh, yeah.
from raising children to a medical issue that requires a gap. but I don't think there's any reason to really draw too much attention to it. If it's a really significant gap, you might want to start a functional resume again. I know I have a twin sister, and my mom took some time off of work when we were born just to take care of us. And when she got back into it, she started with a functional resume.
Yeah.
We're going to move on here.
Okay.
Back to the PowerPoint.
All right. Another way to format, once again, is through the use of columns. If you don't like using tables, you can always use a column. And columns work great for short, bulleted items. So if you do have a list of certifications or technologies, software that you want to showcase, rather than having just a short bulleted list and then a bunch of white space off to the right, you can always split that up into a 2-column or even 3-column section for your resume.
All right. And that concludes what I would like to think of as the bird's eye view part of the resume webinar. We've talked about the larger issues like organization and customizing the image of a resume.
The overall look.
But now I'd like to dial things in a little bit on some of the specific elements of a resume. First to talk about is job objective statements. Most resumes, whether they're functional, chronological, or a hybrid resume, are going to start off with a job objective statement identifying what you can contribute to the company. Now, you see there the you and contribute being highlighted there. Those are the most important concepts there. And if I could break it down even further, the contribute is probably the most important one. You're going to be focusing in on what you want, what your target job is, but also you're going to be focusing in on what role you want to play with the company. So I want to take a look right now at 3 job objective statements that maybe come across as a little bit self-centered on occasion, focusing more on the employee part of the equation as opposed to the job part of the equation. Let it come up for you guys. Here's the first one. And I'll go through and point out some things that work well as someone's things that I think could be improved. Target goal: to work as a network administrator or systems engineer in a challenging environment where I can utilize my experience and enhance my skills to meet with the organization's objectives. Furthermore, to be a part of a team which provides the organization with its information technology vision. There are some really strong things here. It begins by identifying a very specific targeted job. Now, that's useful for the reader to be immediately able to categorize the resume, and it's also useful in increasing searchability. So if someone searches for a bank of resumes for network administrator, it's probably going to pop up fairly prominently. I've also got challenges, environments, and enhance my skills. Here's the part where it starts getting maybe a little iffy. The enhance my skills puts a kind of a spotlight, kind of like this literal spotlight tool I'm using right now, on the fact that there are skills maybe that aren't up to par. The goal here is that the employee is willing to improve and grow with the organization, but the phrasing there casts it in not quite the right light. And then the entire job objective as well is a little bulky in the phrasing and could probably be trimmed down.
Yeah, the really difficult part is really framing your job objective statements from a more positive light. It is kind of difficult to do. It really comes down to like the word choices and how things are phrased more than anything else. And you do want to stay positive and more company focused.
So let's look at this next one here.
Oh, and by the way, all of these are sample resumes that we received for this webinar. So these are real job objective statements.
And we got number 2, intend to build a career with leading corporate high-tech environment with committed and dedicated people, which will improve myself and realize my potential, willing to work as a key player in a challenging and creative environment. It's a similar thing here. The emphasis on improve myself and realize potential. Unless it's a specific situation, most employers are going to be looking for someone who has actualized potential, not potential. So I think that part could be marginalized and framed in a way that emphasizes a willingness to grow as opposed to focusing on maybe what hasn't been achieved yet. And the next one, to obtain a full-time IT engineering position in a progressive and career-oriented organization that can take advantage of my interpersonal facilitation, implementation, and technical experience. Additionally, help me grow, eventually lead to a leadership or project management position. Now here's a more successful way to frame it. It's got the same emphasis on personal growth, but rather than putting on what the employee will get out of the growth, it talks about how this will help them grow with the company. So the emphasis is on what the company would get out of hiring you, as opposed to what you might get out of being hired for the company. So to give a point of comparison, here's the same basic objective statements revised just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that, folks. Job objective 1, to work as a network administrator or systems engineer in a challenging environment where my experience and skills contribute to the organization's information technology vision. Right there, we've got the most important parts, this information technology vision and the job objectives statements being the most prominently placed. Number 2, to build a career. Now, just by editing out some of the language, the emphasis is on building a career and sticking with an organization, as opposed to some of the other emphasis on what hadn't been done yet. With a leading high-tech corporation of committed and dedicated people working as a key player in a challenging and creative environment. 3.
You want me to read that, hon?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. To obtain a full-time IT engineering position in a progressive and career-oriented organization that can take advantage of my interpersonal skills and technical experience while providing opportunities for future leadership or project management roles. Now, I really like the wording of this last part here compared to the original format, mainly because the original format, the way it was worded, it kind of sounded like they were applying for 2 jobs at once. The job that they want right now and another job that may or may not exist in the future. This way, phrasing it like that last statement a little bit differently, while providing opportunities for future leadership, that kind of opens up, hey, I am willing to grow and take on more responsibilities over time. And it's a little bit less presumptuous.
The key takeaway with all of these, though, is that job objective statements will establish your goals, but they also begin establishing your relationship with the company. Now, however you frame your objective statement, that's really the key point to keep in mind, is that you're also introducing yourself and your personality as an employee in addition to stating what your ideal job would be. And speaking of describing your positions, that brings us to developing content according to your career objective and the job ad or company for which you're applying. We're going to focus in on the content in just a little bit in point 4, but for right now, we're going to leave this behind and take you on a little tour of the job ad or company. Every company is going to have its own persona, its own identity. So when you create a resume, you shouldn't just be thinking about your own background, but about the intersection between your background and the potential company.
Go to the company's website and do your homework. I can't begin to tell you how many resumes I've seen where the resume, the cover letter, the application questions, you know, a lot of companies will ask you to answer questions in a company with your resume as you submit it. They don't address anything about the company, and in some cases I kind of question whether or not they even read the job ad when applying. So it's always a good idea to do your homework, and to give you an example of a company, Train Signal. If you go to our careers page, we have all this information about our company that is really there to help people kind of figure out who we are. You know, through the resume process, through the interview process, that's us learning about who you are. And again, there's some information available on site before you even apply that you can use to decide whether or not our company is a right fit for you. So scrolling down the page, this is something that a lot of other companies do. We have our values, our corporate values, posted on our website, and they are excellence, integrity, innovation, knowledge, and happiness. And from this information, that's what we're looking for in an employee that's applying, someone who can match or mesh with this company culture, the corporate climate.
Yeah, you hear of words like culture fit being bandied about in employee selection, and a lot of companies put a great deal of emphasis on that.
And rightly so, I think.
Yeah, I do too. You want everyone in the company to have kind of a coherent identity and be able to work well together. And incidentally, this is also one of the best ways to make yourself stand out during the application process. Scott Skinger, who's owner and founder of Train Signal,
CEO.
And CEO, wrote a blog for the Train Signal training site once where he talked about his most recent round of soliciting applications for a job. Of the 350 or so resumes, I'm fudging the numbers right now, but of the large amount of resumes that he got, he said there were only 2 or 3 that showed any awareness or knowledge whatsoever of who his company was and what they did. And that willingness to do the homework and take advantage of that interaction was enough to get people bumped into the phone interview stage. Just simply that trait. Now, a lot of information is out there, and if you want more details and information about how to research a company, there's actually a pamphlet available for download at the Train Signal Training website and the blog part of it that has a more detailed analysis of how you can go and find these things. So let's move on. Now that we've talked about developing content according to your career objectives and the job ad for which you are applying, it's time to talk about making bullet points specific to your accomplishments. The bullet point is kind of the meat and potatoes of a resume. It's the point where you dig in and describe your job and what you did. Now that describe word throws people off sometimes. We mentioned earlier that a resume is not a biography, so your bullet points aren't just going to be a list of everything you've ever done. They're going to be a list of the times when you really stood out and made some kind of tangible contribution, ideally. Let's start off looking at this example, which has a lot of bulk and content to it, but I think isn't ideal. This is an example for a network and systems administrator. Perform daily system monitoring, verifying the integrity and availability of all hardware, server resources, systems, and key processes, reviewing system and application logs, and verifying completion of scheduled jobs such as backups. Those are all very good things, if they've got a lot of keywords there and duties done, but
It's a long bullet point.
It's a long bullet point, and I think the biggest issue is that there's nothing here that just isn't part of a normal description of a network and systems administrator.
Yeah, they're all very...
This is all very general, it could be applied to almost anybody who would do this job.
And the idea is to make yourself unique and stand out.
Yeah, whoever is hiring for this position knows what a network system administrator does.
You'd hope at least.
Yeah, ideally. So what you want to do is, in addition to demonstrating these basic tools and skills, you want to be able to demonstrate how you were able to apply them as an individual. Now there's 2 key parts here, in addition to some of the other things, and that's the perform daily system monitoring and verifying completion of scheduled backups. We're going to take these and reframe them to hopefully demonstrate how they could be realized.
A little bit more focused around the accomplishment.
Yeah, you've got this one. By performing daily system monitoring, was able to analyze network usage patterns to increase overall bandwidth and user productivity by 5%.
Now that's something specific to work with.
Well, the emphasis is not on what you did, but on what happened as a consequence of what you did. And that's a really crucial difference, I would say.
If you take away anything from this webinar, make it this.
Well, you can look at the next one as well. Increase network reliability and integrity by developing a standardized backup strategy for crucial data. In that case, it's not just that you monitored the backups, but it puts an emphasis on this is how the company was different after I got there. A change in the company culture, an improved process, something like that. To give you another way of thinking of it, this first one answers the question, what did you do? The second part answers the question of why did you do it? What was the purpose behind the action? And finally, what was accomplished as a result?
So like that overall bandwidth and user productivity by 5%, very quantifiable end result. That's always a very good thing to try to include or work in, or even make the focus of it. That's the accomplishment right there.
And you can see a similar framework here.
And the second one, it's a little bit less structured than the other one, less details, but again, the focus is on the accomplishment. Increased network reliability and integrity, great accomplishment. How did you do it? What did you do? By developing standardized backup strategy for crucial data. Now, if we want to break this apart even further, I know a lot of people kind of get overwhelmed like, oh, I can't write that on my own. Here's the template for it. if you just take out all the stuff that's really specific to the job, you can use this as like your template for writing your own very specific accomplishment-focused bullet points. By enter job responsibility here, that's the implied I, was able to enter objective relating to job responsibility here, to enter accomplishment here, by enter quantifiable amount here. I know it's a little bit ridiculous. It's a lot of things to enter, but it gets the job done. It's a really good framework to use to get you started if this is something that is difficult for you. And the second one's a little bit easier. You just begin with the accomplishment by enter specific action that you performed here.
Now, just like the global advice for templates, you don't want to rely on these too heavily, but if you need a framework, that can be useful to plug in your data.
It's a good starting place.
Now, here's another example for something that doesn't quite meet the needs. You've got follow and assist in defining procedures. The problem with this is that it's too general. And rather than highlighting accomplishment, it states an unremarkable job responsibility. I'd love to be able to give you another example of how this particular bullet point could be revised, but I wouldn't know what to do. There are so many procedures associated with the systems administration.
I have no idea what this guy does.
This could be setting security policies, email access policies, managing the more technical parts of the network. I really don't know. And so in order to nail this down, it would have to be what procedures are being discussed. The content is great. Defining procedures, if you identified some sort of standard operating protocol, great, tangible contribution.
It's also backing away a little bit from that accomplishment. And again, this is even a more vague job description.
And here's a contrast for this one. This is, again, another systems administrator. It's not a defining procedure question, but I think it is nice and concrete. In phase 1 of a large-scale project, 6 weeks, prepared all online documentation, training material, and trained 19 new employees for the new sports center help desk in India. You look at this one, and I think most people would be able to say that not every applicant has done this. It is something unique just to this employee, and ideally there's going to be an intersection between this kind of job and the objectives of the job that they're applying for. Now, we're going to leave behind the wordsmithing and content stuff for just a minute. Oh, well, as you can see again, highly specific, emphasizes direct contributions and meaningful results.
All right. And talk very, very quickly about another aspect of creating a resume. And, this kind of ties back to what I was talking about before with templates, in that when you're thinking about the visual overall look of a resume, you should make sure that all of your visual choices are meaningful. So that's what I mean when the tip number 6, create a visually meaningful resume. Now, with your resume, you can almost, from bird's eye view, see that there are sections to your resume. The top third of that very first page, that area should be saved for the most important and relevant information. That question that we pointed out earlier about certifications, you recently got the certifications, doesn't have a whole lot of experience, boom, place that in that upper third area. That, again, that's high, good, expensive real estate up there.
It also increases searchability to some extent. The way a lot of search engines work, depending on which database is being used, is somebody will type in a term, and the search engine goes according to the frequency of certain terms as well as their prominence within the resume. And typically, stuff at the top of the resume gets weighted a little bit highly. I don't think that should be the end-all, be-all of how you design a resume, but it is a component that might be worth keeping in mind.
Another thing when you're designing a resume, when you're thinking about that overall look, that you should consider is the use of white space and how you use white space. Now, white space, it's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it can communicate something that you don't necessarily want it to. So we're going to play a little game right now called What Does This White Space Mean? So, taking a look, let me wait for the slide to load for you guys. Here's a one-page resume, the kind of bird's eye view of it. We don't need all the specific details, just glancing at it. You can see that it goes about down to the little bit more than half mark, and then there's tons of white space at the bottom. What do you think at a glance that means? And I've got a nice little poll for you guys here. What does the white space mean for that one-page resume? Take your time, vote. We've got, I just graduated college. I can't support my points. I can't remember what I did in the last 3 jobs. And I spend my days dwelling on the emptiness.
Fighting off the encroaching gloom. All right, I think that's enough for that.
All right, finish your votes. And we're going to close this up now.
Closing, sharing.
And here's what you guys think. We have 17 who think that that person just graduated college. 56, I can't support my points. 11%, I can't remember what I last did in the last 3 jobs. And 60%, yeah, real funny. So
I can't support my points is really the accurate one. When people see a resume that's really brief like this, the person looking at the resume isn't going to fill in the gaps for you. So they're going to assume either that you don't have anything else to say or that you're not able to develop your points communication-wise.
if you are in this situation at this point, I really would strongly recommend hiring someone to help you, because sometimes, personally, it's really hard to come up with like the details of your job that are accomplishments or that are the wow points. And talking it over with an expert really can help you fill out that page. So there's one thing there, and let's hide that. Now here we have another example. This is a 2-page resume. First page filled very, very nicely, and then we have this second page where we have like a couple of little lines at the top, maybe a little tiny paragraph followed by a bunch of white space. So one more time. What does the white space mean? Go ahead, fill out that poll.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
30 seconds. We've got look at my potential. Look at it. You will complete me. New job. I don't know how to adjust margins or headers in Microsoft Word. And it's meaningless because you'll probably lose this page as the interviewer.
I think that's enough.
Okay. Let's close this poll. And here's what you guys said. 7% look at my potential. 6% you will complete me. 73% think it's a Microsoft Word problem. Interesting. All right, don't forget we are giving away the Microsoft Office 2010 Word course at the end. Stay tuned for that. All right, and we also have a 5-page resume, and you know what? Doesn't have a whole lot of white space. One more poll, one last time. What do you think that means, guys? 30 seconds.
Choices. I like to write and talk a lot. I should have your job. You'll never be able to pay me what I'm worth. I don't know how to be selective. I didn't listen to tip number 1.
And closing that poll, here is what you guys think. I don't know how to be selective. I didn't listen to tip number 1.
And that really is the correct answer.
It really is.
Other than the blunt arrogance of I should have your job, which isn't going to get you far as a job objective statement, incidentally. This really is a question of selectiveness. What people are going to see when they look at a resume without a lot of white space is just a chunk. These big blocks of information that become, well, there's nothing to really focus on.
The eye does not know where to look when there's so much text on a page. Same thing goes for PowerPoint, by the way. Tons of text, the eye doesn't know where to go.
You ever see a 2-year-old run around the room where they're focusing on everything all at once and getting distracted?
And overstimulated.
It's a similar kind of phenomenon.
And excellent point by James Gibbons here. No one will read that.
Yes, you're
exactly
absolutely right. And part of it is because the writer of the resume isn't paying attention to what you want them to read. One of the words we're going to hear a lot is consistency in a resume, and another one is prioritization. And I think this is an issue with prioritization. it's also connected not just with the content, but with how long it takes you to talk about the content. The next thing that we're going to be addressing, white space communicates just as your words do.
Yeah, just kind of a little parting thought.
Yeah.
Again, white space can communicate negative things, or you can also use white space to effectively draw attention to important points. If there's an award that you've won or something, accomplishment, make sure that there's a lot of white space around it to draw attention to that important point. And again, this resume I want to bring back just to kind of give you a quick little tutorial of like the use of white space here. There's not a lot. There's a lot of text on the page. But if you notice where the eye goes to, you can go quickly to the objective, the education, the experience sections, and the actual job titles here. And we can see web developer, companysite.com. We can see freelance web designer really easily because of the white space surrounding those points. Also, the dates are highlighted here very well, where you can see exactly how long that person spent with that particular company. So again, I would call that an effective use of white space for that information. But again, in the paragraph, this huge area down below web developer, companysite.com, you can barely read it, and the eye just sort of, it's all that information is lost in there. So that would probably not be an effective use of white space. Now, one more thing when we're talking about visuals in regards to your resume. There are certain things that do not belong in a resume because they are visually distracting. And it's a lot of pictures, icons, they don't belong. If you've got a certification, write it out. Don't throw the logo on your resume. And we've been seeing this a lot more recently. I don't know who's out there telling you to do that. Don't do that. Plus, if you're emailing a resume, uploading it to a site, that is adding like digital space. Mm-hmm. Like it makes your file size a lot bigger, and it may not load as easily. It may be rejected from the online platform. Leave the images off.
Those kind of graphic files are also typically not searchable in most databases.
Yeah.
So that becomes an issue as well. All right. This idea of design of a resume in the white space is also connected to the content and the language and what's prioritized. So tip number 7 is keep language concise and content focused. I think this might also be a good time to mention that it is 1 o'clock, and we technically said this was going to be an hour resume.
Sorry about that.
Rather ironic since we're here on the point about being concise. But if you have to leave, have an hour break at lunch or something like that.
This is being recorded.
Lovely having you. This is being recorded. Will be available shortly after the recording finishes up. So by all means.
We're going to continue on and be here for question and answers, so if you can stay, great. If not,
get
the recording.
How you can get into what you missed. So what I'd like to do now, the best way to demonstrate this idea of conciseness, and by the way, concise means efficient. Using a lot with very few amount of words. I teach college classes as well sometimes, and I got a student once who was trying to make a 3-page paper into a 5-page one. And so what she did was to stretch out the language. She had a sentence that read, "It is commonly accepted among those individuals who are practitioners of the Catholic faith." I got it on a paper, crossed the whole thing out, and wrote "Catholics believe." We have 2 words there that did the job of 12. So you have to sort of be able to identify those moments in a resume where the language gets a little bloated and consequently the information gets a little bloated.
And for that, we're going to bring up one of the sample resumes that was emailed to us in preparation for this resume webinar.
Now, what you can see here is, hopefully you can see the scrolling. This resume is about a 2.5 or maybe 2 1/8 page resume. Now, there's a lot of information there, and overall, it's a very good resume. The content is specific, accurate, and so on. But we got to get it onto the 2 pages. So you go through, the first thing to cut is a content thing. It says Help Desk Specialist, October 1998 to December 1998.
And this kind of ties into a question we had earlier by Elliot. When did you decide to leave off earlier jobs that might not be so relevant to the position you're currently aiming for? Help Desk Specialist, when you're applying for, what is he applying for again?
Can't recall.
Yeah, something that's not Help Desk.
Yeah, this person's career has gone well beyond the help desk
phase.
And I also would advocate cutting it because up here you see another help desk job from January 1999 to June 2000. So it's a job that was worked for a year and a half as opposed to just a couple of months. So I think that entire thing is gone.
Deletable.
So that right there gets us down to needing about 6 lines of virtual space that needs to be cut. You can move on, and the next thing to look for are moments in the resume where there's what are sometimes called in publishing widows or orphans. And those are lines of text that kind of exist in isolation on a line. You know, so like this
one or
just has
two words spill over.
Yeah. So it says diagnose problem source through discussions with users, coordinate with engineers and operations groups to resolve problems. You've got diagnose problem source through discussion with users. Change that to user discussions. Cut the with users part. And coordinate with engineers and operations groups to resolve problems. One other thing you can do sometimes if you're talking about two things is using a dash instead. So instead of the and, you've got a slash there that identifies both groups. We're up to 1 line, only 4 lines to deliver. Looking up under Hewitt Associates, received level 2 calls for issues with installation, corruption, and general error messages with Lotus Notes via email and remedy. Now, the most impressive word here is remedy, which is a little buried on the point, particularly when compared with the word received. So instead of that, let's change it to remedied level 2 calls for issues with installation, corruption, and general error messages with Lotus Notes via email.
Yeah, always go for the stronger verb.
Yeah, remedied is much better than received. Other things that we can cut. Under Hewitt Associations, it says here served as main liaison to multiple projects which involve 3 separate time frames to implement a new support center help desk in India. That more identifies the nature of the project. It's also something, though, that's identified here in the other bullet points. So if we cut this first bullet point, since it's explained later on, we have only 2 lines to deal with now. Let's see what else we've got. Here we go. Hewitt Associates, responsible for the administration and ownership of 2 technical reference databases. Great. Responsible for, though, is again a weaker verb. The more impressive one could be administered. So if we change that to administered and owned, get rid of the of, 2 technical reference databases on Lotus Notes and 6.5 X platforms, we're down to our 2 pages. Now that didn't cut any actual content that was significant to the resume itself. Now if we're really getting fancy with this one, I think what needs to happen next would be to try to get this on 1 page.
And that's because of this one area down below, page 1, Abbott Laboratories, October 2005 to July 2008. That is a huge section, and it's split between 2 different pages. And typically you want to keep all of your bullet points with that job title or that job heading. So I'd actually try to move that down a bit to the 2nd page by inserting a page break. And then you've got a little bit more space on page 1 to play around with formatting to make maybe your certifications, or better yet, your technical skills section stand out. Because right now, all of those technical skills, it's really hard to read the way it's currently formatted. So I would spend some time maybe adding some like double columns or a little bit more structure to that area now that we have a little bit more room to play with.
Okay. And I think that does it for conciseness. So
and again, I mean, this is just, again, like I'm scratching the surface of what you can do. But notice it didn't really take that much time to get it down to 2 pages. And all we did was look for those lines that spilled over to that 2nd line, those really long bullet points. And really, all it amounts to is taking out the prepositional phrases.
I see a comment here regarding to the one about remedied level 2 calls. It says remedy is a ticking software for help desk operations. Did not know that particular detail. In that case, obviously, I wouldn't endorse that particular edit, but the overall point about hunting for widows and orphans for the sake of conserving vertical space, I'd say hopefully remains valid. Want to move on to point number 8?
Yeah.
These last ones are short.
Yeah, these last ones are short. We front-loaded the webinar. All right, so number 8, watch out for common grammar errors. And we're going to fly through these really quick just because these have grown to almost become pet peeves for me. I don't know about you, but number 1, capitalization.
When you work within a resume, there's 2 ways of doing it. One has to do with a capitalization style that's a sentence style, and that's where you follow the same kind of conventions as you would in a normal sentence. The other is to treat bullet points as though you're using a title capitalization style. And in a title capitalization style, typically, everything that's not an article like a, the, or an, or a preposition like to, with, or in, is going to be capitalized. And conjunctions as well, like and, are not capitalized. The issues occur when there's inconsistent capitalization strategies. You look at the first bullet point here, follow and assist in defining procedures. There's some capitalization there, like follow is capitalized, procedures are capitalized. Assist should probably be capitalized then. Because unless defining procedures is a proper noun, it could be depending upon the industry you're working with. You want to make sure that there's a consistent work being used there. So there's 2 ways that you could do it. The first one here is just using standard sentence capitalization. First word capitalized, train new and existing staff as administrators. Or the second one uses the title kind of capitalization. Or the third one, I'm sorry. Own and troubleshoot technical issues and support through to resolution.
And yeah, in that case, all words are capitalized except for, I think the convention is prepositions and articles,
conjunctions.
Yeah. Now we have through capitalized. There's an exception to that rule that some people follow, and that's if the word is more than, I think, 4 or 5 characters long, then you can capitalize that preposition. So, basically, whatever you choose to do, you should keep it consistent throughout. Switching between the 2 is usually a sign that you don't have a lot of attention to detail.
Yeah. The next one is about verb tense conventions. When you're working a job that you currently have, you need to use the present tense, like develop and maintain installation and configuration procedures. The tense there communicates, without the reader even having to look at the dates of the job, that this is a job you currently have. Now, you do need to use develop as the tense, not develops or developing, or whatever the form of the verb is, because you want to imagine that there's an implied I in front of that. So I develop and maintain, as opposed to I develops or I developing, which wouldn't match the structure of the sentence. If it's a past job, when you no longer have, you need to use the past tense of the verb, of course. Performed daily backup operations. It's not a job you have currently, so it needs to be, the tense needs to indicate that. I mention that because I've seen a lot of resumes lately where all of the jobs are in present tense. And I think it often happens when people revise resumes simply as a matter of adding new stuff. So when you go and add another job to your resume, make sure and adjust the previous jobs as well, and just adjust for them. Next one to talk about.
Now, this is a pet peeve of mine personally, and the question here is, what is the difference between these punctuation marks? The very first one is, well, that's a hyphen. The second one, however, it's a line that's a little bit longer. That's what is known as an N dash. The third one, even longer still, is what's known as an M dash. Now, all of these various punctuation marks have different uses and different meanings associated with them. Hyphens are used to join 2 words together. Co-worker used to be a hyphenated word, and then sometimes, the hyphens get lopped up and then just become 1 word. So any word pairing that's not typically 2 words that should be apart but together, if you're hyphenating them, that's what you use the hyphen for. That's that keyboard key. The N dash, that is used to show a date range. So if you want to show that you've worked from this date to this date, that's when you'd use the N dash. Now, to use an N dash in Microsoft Word, the easiest way to make sure you're using the correct one is to go to the Insert tab, click on Symbol, and choose N dash from the normal font group. That's the best way to do it. Microsoft Word will do some autocorrect options. If you've noticed you typed a hyphen and then you start typing like more words together, it will automatically convert it to an en dash, and sometimes you may or may not want that. So, for example, in the case of the em dash, if you are writing a sentence in a cover letter or in your objective statement and you want to use the em dash to act as kind of like an interrupter, like basically anything set off with an em dash or a pair of em dashes, that's usually an interruption to whatever you have in that sentence. So that's the difference between those three punctuation marks. Now we have an example from that sample resume we showed you earlier in the education section that shows how this is inconsistently used. So in that education section in the right-hand side, we have February 2011 to the present. There he uses an en dash, and appropriately, that's the correct way to do it. However, if you notice, the rest of them use hyphens, and one of them doesn't have a space before it, one of them has spaces around it. You want to keep this consistent, because visually you want to show that you, well, number one, know how to use Microsoft Word, and number two, have that eye for detail. Another thing about the dates, just want to throw this in, you could align it to the right here, but that's just another thing.
Speaking of an eye for detail, be careful with spell check. We looked at a resume not too long ago where it emphasized that they have Microsoft Certified Systems Administrator massaging. And I don't think that was the thing that was being communicated. So just like I tell students sometimes, spell check suggested doesn't mean you necessarily have to take it, and they can sometimes add up to, you know, kind of amusing errors.
Yeah, when in doubt, if you don't know which word to choose, messaging or massaging, look it up in a dictionary.
The spell check can, however, be useful and the Microsoft tools when handling another common problem on this issue.
Now,
this is more of a cover letter thing than a resume.
And this one is kind of falling out of fashion. I'm going to fight hard to keep this one going. There's resume, which has no accents over the E's, and that means something completely different than resume. Resume is a verb, and it means to begin again. Resume is a noun, and it's a brief written account of personal, educational, and professional qualifications. Two different words. But with the internet and search engine optimization, if you look at our website, we don't use the accents. Anyway, it's again for SEO because it's just better that way. But when you are referring to a resume in cover letters, you're writing about your own resume, throw in the accents, please, for me. I like it. There's a wonderful keyboard shortcut in Microsoft Word to help you do so. Type Control, then the little apostrophe, and then type the E. And that will automatically type that accented E for you. Or you can use, as Alan suggested earlier, spell check. If you purposely misspell it, R-E-S-M-E, then right-click on the red squiggly line. You can choose the one with the word with the accents there, and that's a lot faster than anything else. So, little tip.
Last two things to talk about is, first one, removing all comments, track changes, and metadata. These are the really final things that you have to go through and check.
And this one I've thrown in here because I did receive a resume recently. We use Resumator, so people can take their Microsoft, it's like an online resume system. They basically upload their Word document or PDF into the Resumator, and we get to see that Word document as a Word document. It's really kind of a cool system. But if you have shared your resume with other people and included a comment, or they've commented on it and given it back, some people think that going to the Review tab and choosing the option from that drop-down menu in the Review tab to Final, yeah, that does hide the comments and any track changes that you may have inside Word. But as soon as you upload that to, like, all of that information still exists. Just having it show as final, that's just, again, the data still lives there. You can change it back. So I would actually recommend going through and removing all of that personal information. Any track changes, any comments, delete them, create a clean copy before you upload, or when in doubt, just create a PDF and upload that instead of the Word document.
Incidentally, we saw a question. Well, first of all, make sure I'll get back to that. I saw a question in the comments section about whether to submit a doc file, a docx, or a PDF. If they request a doc or docx, that's fine, but if you use docx, make sure and do something that would be backwards compatible. But most of the time, the convention is going to be PDF. PDF has the best opportunity for your resume to have the formatting preserved. You don't want things to go all wonky. If there's a font that you use that someone else doesn't have, you probably shouldn't be using unconventional fonts in a resume. But in order to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen, PDF is going to make the best representation of your resume.
And the last tip, a very short tip, it kind of explains itself. Make sure every page includes your name. With IT resumes, it's very common to have 2-page resumes.
Or significantly longer at times.
Yeah, but most of the time 2 pages kind of is the etiquette for IT resumes. And if that's the case, put your name on the second page. Even better, put your phone number as well next to your name.
Yeah, you can repeat all of the contact information. And the reason for the page numbers is that even though most resumes are submitted electronically, it's not at all uncommon when the final selection phase is going on to print out all of the resumes that for candidates in serious contention,
even just for the interview,
and just pass them around the conference table so that people can have the discussions face to face. And if that's the case, you don't want a significant page of your resume getting lost in the shuffle, or with a 5-page resume, you don't want all the organization you worked so hard to develop in tip 1 to get thrown out the window because the pages are out of order. So those are our top 10 tips. We want to take a few minutes and scroll through the chat questions here.
Yeah.
See if we have anything that you want to answer.
All right.
So let's give Heather and Alan a second to look through those. I know that we have gone over on time a little bit, so if you can't stay, just a reminder, you can always view the question portion or the whole webinar again at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. But if you are going to go, don't forget to take that survey. It will show up when you exit out of the presentation. You need to do that to be eligible to win one of those 3 copies of Microsoft Word 2010 training that we're going to be giving away.
Another way, if you can't stay and you have a question, don't forget the Twitter handle for this webinar is TS Top 10 Resume, or we're both on Twitter. I'm at Heather Ackmann, and he is at Alan Ackmann.
Yeah, I'll be glad to answer any questions that come up. I see questions here about certifications. How do employers view certifications? Is there such a thing as too many? It really depends upon the employer and what they're looking to get out of the position.
And for that, I think that goes back to our tip number 1 in terms of selecting content. If the job ad, job description, or company stresses such a thing as certifications, for example, Train Signal, we love certifications here. So yeah, we look at certifications. We like certifications. Include them if it's related to the job especially.
And if you're concerned about there being too many, probably the way to go is to not eliminate certifications, but to come up with formatting for the section so that they're appropriately categorized. If you've got them broken up into the type of certification that you've gotten or some criteria like that, doing that makes it seem like a little bit less of a huge block of text and makes it easy to scan. Remember, in the first pass, an employer spends less than 10 seconds looking at your resume, so you want to be able to format it and make sure that it's the important stuff is going to jump out. I see a couple of other things. I want to move from hands-on technical job to more of a team management role. How do I bring that out in my resume? Emphasize your soft skills. When you go through and you have it elaborate on your technical jobs, emphasize the times you worked with people, either in leadership or just a team building capacity.
Any project management that you've done, especially.
Yeah.
Your written, your verbal communication skills. Try to emphasize that.
Yeah, if you've done a technical job and you've written out any kind of policies or procedures, that kind of material could be more useful. Should you put class projects, cert prep, and volunteer work and experience? Not an experience, but you can put it on the resume. If you're light on job history, but you've got a college degree, for example, it's fine to elaborate on the college work that you've done using bullet points, just the way you would for a class prep, or just the way you would for a traditional job. Let's take one more, at least one more.
Is embellishing a resume unacceptable? Yes.
Yeah.
Don't
I would
embellish.
say so.
Don't lie. Be honest. Again, this is the whole point of a resume, is to highlight the most unique aspects of you that are in correlation to the job you are applying for.
And is it acceptable to not put your address on a resume?
It's a little unheard of. Pretty much they want to know where you live.
Having said that, if you have a privacy reason or a reason not to,
Email,
you can
phone
put email
number.
address, phone.
Thanks for making me laugh, guys. Enjoyed it. Thanks.
There you go. Should I mention preparing for a certification in a resume? Probably not. You want the focus on a resume to be on what you've already done, not on what you could potentially done in the future or haven't done yet.
Now, that being said, that would provide some opportunity maybe in the cover letter to introduce that you are continuing your education by studying for a certification exam. But employers, for the most part, again, prime real estate, that resume, you want to focus on what you already have accomplished.
And the last one here, if we're making a big step in the career, do you recommend the person should have his or her resume done professionally? It's not going to hurt anything.
Not going to hurt anything.
You know, there's a lot of people out there that are willing to do the job. If not professionally, at least be sure to show it to a couple of people whose opinions about writing in the industry you respect. One thing you can also do for our parting thought is take a look at trainsignaltraining.com, where we do have regular updates in blog form about all things resume, from certifications to writing to interviewing.
Yep.
And I think that's pretty much it from our point of view. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Yep, that's it for today. Thanks again for attending and for your participation. If we didn't get to your question, we will be answering a few more via email. And as a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and will be available later today at trainsignal.com/blog/webinars. And as I mentioned, I guess I'll say it again, you do need to fill out that survey to be one of the 3 participants selected to receive the copy of our Word training for free. We will email the winners to let you know, so be on the lookout in your inbox. And thanks for coming.